She was just a few hundred yards from home when she vanished without a trace, setting off one of Italy's most haunting mysteries. What started as a routine evening soon escalated into a massive police search, and over time, the case became one of the most infamous in modern Italy, leaving millions in shock. No one could have imagined that the twists and turns of this case would rival any detective movie, or that something this chilling could happen in real life. Yara Gambirario was born on May 21, 1997, in a small Italian town called Brembate di Sopra. This quiet place, not far from Milan, has a population of just over 7,000 and is known for its peaceful atmosphere, historic architecture, and stunning natural surroundings. Yara's family had lived there for generations. She had loving parents, an older sister, and 2 younger brothers. She adored her hometown, attended the local school, had many friends, and was deeply passionate about gymnastics. Just a few hundred yards from her home stood a large sports center where Yara trained almost every week. On November 26, 2010, at just 13 years old, she planned to stop by the gym quickly to return a stereo to her coach. At around 5:15 p.m., she said goodbye to her parents and headed out, assuring them she'd be back in about an hour. Yara's parents weren't worried about letting her go alone. Despite her age, the town was safe, and the walk to the gym took just minutes. But as the evening wore on, concerns started creeping in. By 7 p.m., Yara still hadn't returned, which was unusual. At 7:11, her mother called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Now genuinely alarmed, her parents immediately contacted the police. The case was referred to a larger police department in a nearby city, and an experienced detective, Letizia Ruggeri, was assigned to investigate Yara's disappearance. She quickly dispatched officers to the town to begin the search and enlisted the help of the military police. After speaking with Yara's parents, investigators headed to the gym to reconstruct her last known movements. Her coach confirmed she had been there around 5:30 p.m. Her friends said they saw her, chatted briefly, watched her do some exercises, and then saw her leave for home. The police also discovered that Yara had sent a text to a friend at 6:44 p.m., the last time anyone heard from her. From this, investigators concluded that Yara had vanished somewhere between the sports complex and her home. Teams were deployed, some combing the streets, while others searched for witnesses and possible clues, including CCTV footage. Several people near the sports center that evening reported seeing a girl matching Yara's description, speaking with 2 men near a red car, but police couldn't confirm if it was really her. A thorough search of the entire sports center turned up nothing. Meanwhile, local and military police scoured the streets, fields, and the banks of a small river running through town. Firefighters and volunteers joined the effort, but Yara was nowhere to be found. Detective Ruggeri then brought in canine units. The search dogs picked up Yara's scent from her belongings, but instead of leading police toward her home, they indicated she had gone in the opposite direction, toward a small town called Mapello. Ruggeri also requested Yara's cell phone location data, which revealed that at 6:49 p.m., just 5 minutes after she texted her friend, her phone had connected to a cell tower in Mapello. Given the distance from the sports center, it was almost certain Yara hadn't walked there on her own. She must have been taken in a vehicle. At this point, Yara's trail went cold. Police focused on 2 main theories: the most likely that she had been kidnapped, the other that she had run away. But there were serious doubts about the latter. Her last message made plans to meet a friend the next day, making it hard to believe she would suddenly decide to disappear. Despite their doubts, investigators interviewed all of Yara's family and friends, but nothing suggested any trouble at home. Ruggeri went a step further, ordering wiretaps on the phones of her relatives and several dozen other individuals. She made a bold move, requesting location data for every phone that had connected to cell towers in Mapello on the night Yara disappeared. If this was an abduction, the kidnapper's phone would have pinged those same towers. However, identifying the perpetrator would still be incredibly difficult. The police received records for 15,000 phones that had been active in the area that evening. A special team was assembled to analyze these numbers and monitor thousands of individuals who seemed suspicious for various reasons. Meanwhile, active searches for Yara continued, but day after day, they led nowhere. Ruggeri began to fear that the investigation was reaching a dead end. Her last hope rested on the phone records. One of those numbers had to belong to the kidnapper. Within days, officers had listened to thousands of hours of recorded conversation, but none appeared linked to Yara's case. The process dragged on for weeks until suddenly, in late November, one officer heard something deeply unsettling. On a wiretapped call, a man whispered a chilling phrase, "Forgive me, Lord, I didn't kill her." Investigators quickly identified the man as Muhammad Fikri, a construction worker from Morocco who lived in the same town where Yara's phone signal had last been detected. The police tried to locate him, but there was a problem. The team monitoring phone conversations was working with a delay of several days. Processing so many calls in real time was impossible, so Fikri's call was only reviewed 3 days after it was made. By the time police became interested in him, he was already aboard a ship heading to Morocco. The situation looked highly suspicious, so Italian authorities made the urgent decision to intercept the vessel. They located Fikri, arrested him, and brought him back to Italy. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered another chilling clue. Searching Fikri's car, they discovered a mattress in the trunk stained with blood. It was immediately sent to a lab for testing. But then came an unexpected twist. The blood did not belong to Yara. In fact, it wasn't even human. Further analysis of the wiretapped phone call revealed another major error. The officer, listening to the recording, had misunderstood Fikri's words in his native language, leading to a mistranslation of the second half of his statement. Additional checks confirmed that Fikri had no involvement in Yara's disappearance, and he was ultimately released. By then, Yara's case had become one of the most widely discussed topics in Italy, dominating national media. Millions followed the search efforts, desperately hoping she would be found alive. When news of Fikri's arrest broke, many believed the case had finally been solved. So when his innocence was confirmed, the public was left stunned and disheartened. It meant that investigators were back at square one, with no other leads to follow. The police continued wiretapping phone calls, searching for new evidence, and pursuing every possible clue, but nothing seemed to bring them closer to finding Yara. This continued for exactly 3 months, until February 26, 2011. That day, a man from a small town 6 miles from Yara's home went to an open field to fly his remote-controlled airplane. But when the aircraft malfunctioned, he had to land it in an area with thick, overgrown grass to prevent it from crashing. As he walked over to retrieve it, he noticed a pile of rags. At first, he thought little of it, until he saw boots sticking out from underneath. That's when he decided to call the police. Officers arrived and discovered a human body hidden under the rags. However, the level of decomposition made it nearly impossible to identify the victim on sight. But when Letizia Ruggeri arrived at the scene, she knew immediately. It was Yara. She was still wearing the same clothes from the night she vanished 3 months earlier. Nearby, investigators found her iPad, house keys, SIM card, and the removable battery from her phone. But the phone itself was missing. Italy's top forensic pathologist was brought in to examine the remains. After a thorough analysis, she determined that Yara's cause of death was multiple stab wounds. No evidence of assault was found, but the fact that some of her clothing had been removed led investigators to believe this was the motive. Experts also uncovered fibers on the body, commonly used in a specific type of fabric, suggesting the killer might have worked in a related manufacturing facility in the area. In addition to this, 2 foreign DNA samples were found, one on Yara's gloves and another on the battery of her missing phone. However, investigators faced several frustrating challenges. The DNA samples they had were incredibly small, making it extremely difficult to extract a complete profile. To make matters worse, there were no matches. in any of the national or international DNA database, leaving them stranded at yet another dead end. It was a devastating setback. But then, 2 months later, Letizia received an unexpected call that changed everything. Experts at the forensic lab had re-examined the victim's belongings and discovered something crucial: biological material found on Yara's underwear. This time, the analysis produced a full DNA profile. The sample belonged to an unknown man. It was their first real breakthrough. With the killer's DNA finally in hand, Letizia wasted no time. She immediately divided her officers into multiple teams, assigning each one a specific, critical task. Some officers were sent to collect DNA samples from every single person connected to Yara: relatives, friends, neighbors, and even everyone at the sports complex she frequented. Others focused on tracking and analyzing cell phone location data, compiling a comprehensive list of numbers belonging to people who had traveled from Yara's town to Mapello that evening. Once identified, those individuals were also asked to provide DNA samples. But the scale of this investigation was massive, and the results weren't coming in quickly. Even with 3 forensic laboratories across Italy working non-stop on the collected DNA, the process was painfully slow. The sheer number of samples meant that the analysis could take years. Over the following months, investigators collected thousands of DNA samples, hoping for a match. Yet despite their tireless effort, none of them aligned with the killer's profile. It was a devastating reality. Letizia found herself constantly thinking about how to generate new leads. She knew they had to get creative. Then she had an idea. Not far from the remote field where Yara's body had been found, there was a nightclub. Letizia knew from experience that criminals often dispose of their victims in areas they are familiar with. This particular club had a notorious reputation. It was a known hotspot for individuals with criminal records and other shady figures. She decided to put her theory to the test. She assigned several officers to monitor the club's entrance every Friday and Saturday night, stopping every visitor and collecting DNA samples. Since the club required membership cards, investigators also gained access to records of everyone who had visited the venue in the past. It was a long shot, but at this point, Letizia was willing to try anything. Then, after weeks of collecting and testing, the breakthrough finally came. One day, she received a life-changing call from the lab. DNA from one of the nightclub visitors partially matched the killer's profile. It was the first real lead in months. The man's name was Damiano. But just as quickly as hope had risen, a new problem emerged. The match was only partial, and upon further investigation, Damiano was immediately ruled out as a suspect. He had been on another continent at the time of Yara's disappearance. However, despite this setback, the discovery was still a huge breakthrough. Forensic experts concluded that because his DNA was so close to the killer's profile, Damiano had to be related to the actual perpetrator. This realization sent investigators down a new path, one that would require them to painstakingly reconstruct Damiano's entire family tree to pinpoint the most likely suspect. At the time, forensic genealogy was not commonly used in criminal investigation. This was uncharted territory, making the process extraordinarily difficult. But soon, the team made a shocking discovery. Damiano's mother had worked as a housekeeper for Yara's family for 10 years. She had left her job a few years earlier. But when she learned that someone in her own family could be involved in Yara's murder, she was deeply shaken. Despite this breakthrough, the search for the actual suspect dragged on for many more months. Letizia eventually came to a troubling conclusion. None of Damiano's immediate relatives were Yara's murderer. This meant investigators would have to expand their search to include hundreds, if not thousands, of distant relatives. As time passed without a definitive suspect, frustration boiled over. The media, once supportive, began turning against the investigators. Newspapers and television programs openly accused Letizia and her team of incompetence, claiming they were failing to make progress. Several politicians even attempted to have her removed from the case, criticizing her approach. But despite the mounting pressure, Letizia remained determined. She refused to back down. She and her team worked tirelessly, poring over countless historical records, family trees, and birth certificates, some dating all the way back to 1716. It was an overwhelming task. They combed through thousands of names, painstakingly cross-referencing details, only to keep hitting dead ends. The investigation was turning into a grueling battle against time. This exhausting, high-stakes search continued relentlessly until September 2011, when investigators finally made a breakthrough. One particular family tree led them to a man named Giuseppe Garinoni, who had already passed away. This was a crucial lead, but there was an immediate challenge. Since Giuseppe was deceased, obtaining his DNA seemed impossible. However, his widow had unknowingly preserved an important clue: old postmarked letters containing his saliva. Forensic experts carefully extracted a DNA sample from these postmarks, and the results were astonishing. The analysis revealed that Giuseppe was very likely either the father or grandfather of the killer, whose DNA had been found on Yara's underwear. This was the closest investigators had come to identifying the perpetrator. Giuseppe had 2 known sons, and police quickly obtained their DNA samples, hoping for a match. But then came another unexpected disappointment. Neither of the sons was the killer. Letizia was stumped. The murderer had to be closely related to this family, yet none of the male relatives matched the DNA profile. That left only one possibility. Giuseppe might have fathered a child with another woman, a secret child his family never knew about. Detectives shifted their focus to this theory, but uncovering such deeply personal and hidden information was incredibly difficult. Investigators interviewed thousands of people who might have known or seen Giuseppe during his lifetime, hoping to find clues about an unknown lover. For nearly a year, their search led nowhere, until they stumbled upon an intriguing detail from Giuseppe's past. Since the 1960s, Giuseppe had been a regular visitor at a spa complex in a small town near Milan. Strangely, he always went alone, never bringing his wife or family. Every May, for 2 full weeks, he stayed at the spa, and no one in his family questioned it. Letizia suspected that this was where he might have met the mother of the killer. She immediately requested records of all visitors who had stayed at the spa during those years. To her surprise, the documents were still available. Investigators meticulously examined every name, compiling a list of all the women who had visited the spa at the same time as Giuseppe. This painstaking process stretched on for over a year, but despite their efforts, Letizia still couldn't uncover the identity of Giuseppe's possible lover. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the secret child theory, and soon, all of Italy was captivated. Journalists, eager to capitalize on the frenzy, launched their own investigation into children born from extramarital affairs. To everyone's surprise, these efforts unearthed many such cases. In one small village alone, reporters found 5 individuals who had been unknowingly fathered by men outside their mothers' marriages. This continued until 2014, when investigators finally made real progress. With widespread public attention on the case, the police began receiving an influx of anonymous tips. However, most of these leads turned out to be dead-end. Then, in the summer of that year, they received a tip that stood out. Someone suggested that Giuseppe might have had an affair with a woman named Esther Azzuffi. Letizia's team searched their records and made a shocking discovery. They had already collected a DNA sample from Esther 2 years earlier. At the time, it had been tested, but the results showed no relation to the killer. Still, something about this new lead made Letizia uneasy. She ordered a second analysis, wanting to be absolutely certain. The results left everyone stunned. It turned out that the original forensic expert had made a critical mistake. Instead of comparing Esther's DNA to the killer's, the expert had accidentally compared it to Yara's DNA. When a new forensic analyst examined the correct samples, the truth finally emerged. Esther was the killer's biological mother. With this long-awaited confirmation in hand, Letizia dug deeper into Esther's family. She discovered that Esther had 3 children, including twins, a boy and a girl, who perfectly fit the age profile of the killer. Officially, the twins were considered the biological children of Esther's legal husband, but based on the DNA evidence, investigators now suspected that Giuseppe Garinoni was the twins' real father. Since the murderer was clearly male, police focused on Esther's son. At the time of the investigation, he was 42 years old, worked as a construction worker, and lived in Mapello. the same town where Yara's cell phone signal had last been detected. This was it. After years of searching, they had finally identified their prime suspect. Letitia knew they had to act carefully. If the suspect realized he was being investigated, he might try to flee or destroy evidence. She needed a way to obtain his DNA sample without alarming him. After some research, she found out that he drove the same road every day. She came up with a plan. Police set up a fake sobriety checkpoint along his route. When the man was pulled over, he unknowingly provided a saliva sample by blowing into a breathalyzer. His saliva was immediately sent to the forensic lab. After 4 long years, Letitia finally received the confirmation she had been waiting for. His DNA was a perfect match to the biological sample found on Yara's underwear. The search was over. The man's name was Massimo Bossetti, and on June 16, 2014, he was finally arrested. But even as the evidence stacked against him, Bossetti refused to confess. He adamantly denied any involvement in Yara's murder, claiming he was innocent. With no confession and a high-profile case that had gripped the nation, the case was far from over. The trial was about to begin. Investigators uncovered several alarming facts that indirectly implicated Massimo Bossetti in Yara's murder. His browser history contained disturbing searches of an unacceptable nature related to minors. Even more suspiciously, on the evening of Yara's disappearance, his cell phone signal was detected in her town. However, at exactly 5:45 p.m., his phone was mysteriously turned off, only to be switched back on the next morning. Surveillance footage from that night revealed Bossetti's van near the sports complex, just minutes before Yara vanished. At the time, the vehicle had no license plates, making it nearly impossible to identify the driver. But after Bossetti's arrest, authorities were able to confirm that the van in the footage was indeed his. Even more damning, forensic analysis showed that fibers from his van's seats perfectly matched fibers found on Yara's body. The prosecution also introduced a key witness, a local woman who lived in Yara's town. She testified that on the night of the disappearance, she had stepped outside to take out the trash when she saw a vehicle speeding past her house. According to her, the car resembled Bossetti's van, and more disturbingly, she saw a child inside. She also recalled hearing screams coming from the vehicle, which sent chills through the courtroom. Further investigations revealed that Bossetti had frequently stopped at a pizzeria located on the same street as Yara's home. This suggested that he had likely seen her before and may have planned the crime in advance. As for the surveillance footage, Bossetti claimed he had simply been driving home from work that evening. But investigators quickly disproved this claim. His colleagues confirmed that he hadn't worked that day. CCTV footage and cell phone location data further contradicted his alibi. With growing public interest, the trial began in the summer of 2015, 1 year after Bossetti's arrest. The case gripped the nation as millions across Italy closely followed the courtroom proceeding. While most people were already convinced of Bossetti's guilt, no one expected the trial to take such shocking turn. The prosecution's version of events was clear. Bossetti had been watching Yara for days, possibly even weeks, waiting for the right moment. The night she vanished, he saw her leave the sports complex alone and abducted her. He then drove her to the isolated field where her body was later found and murdered her. Their main theory was that Bossetti intended to assault her, but for some reason never went through with it. Bossetti's wife took the stand and provided an alibi, stating that he was at home with their family, having dinner at the time of Yara's disappearance. However, this statement was directly contradicted by CCTV footage, as well as 3 separate witnesses who all saw Bossetti's van near the sports complex at the time he claimed to be at home. The defense, however, fought back hard. They insisted that Bossetti was innocent and the case against him was flawed. Bossetti himself argued that he often had nosebleeds, which could have transferred his blood onto his clothes and tools. His lawyer took this argument further, suggesting that the real killer might have somehow come into contact with Bossetti's blood before committing the crime, implying that this could explain why Bossetti's DNA was found on Yara's underwear. The defense also challenged the DNA evidence, questioning its reliability. They pointed out that there are 2 types of DNA, one that changes significantly between relatives and another that remains stable over generations. The DNA found on Yara's underwear belonged to the second type, meaning, according to them, that it could belong to anyone distantly related to Bossetti. But forensic experts from the prosecution strongly disagreed. They maintained that Bossetti's DNA was an exact match and left no room for doubt. However, just when it seemed like the case was settled, the defense dropped a bombshell. They named a new suspect, a gym instructor named Sylvia. The courtroom was stunned. It turned out that after Yara's body was discovered, forensic experts had found Sylvia's blood on the sleeve of Yara's jacket. This revelation sent shockwaves through the trial. Sylvia's father also made a disturbing claim. On the night of Yara's disappearance, Sylvia had come home and cried uncontrollably for the entire night. Even more suspiciously, investigators discovered that Sylvia had texted her brother that same evening. However, both of them had deleted the messages shortly after, making it impossible to recover their content. When questioned in court, Sylvia had no explanation. She claimed she didn't remember why she had cried all night, what she had texted her brother, or how her blood had ended up on Yara's clothing. Her response? I don't know. Despite this shocking revelation, there was no concrete evidence linking Sylvia to Yara's abduction or murder. With no alternative suspect, the trial reached its climax. In the summer of 2016, Bossetti was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His legal team fought hard, trying to overturn the verdict, but every appeal failed. But the story didn't end there. The day after the verdict, Bossetti's wife visited him in prison. During the visit, she dropped a devastating revelation. None of their 3 children were biologically his. She admitted that she had been unfaithful multiple times, and Bossetti was not the father of any of them. In another strange twist, it was later revealed that Esther's 3rd child, Bossetti's supposed sibling, wasn't fathered by Geppi Gerinoni either. Instead, the child's biological father was another man entirely. Since his conviction, Bossetti has remained in prison, insisting on his innocence. But with overwhelming evidence against him, the case was considered closed, a case that gripped an entire nation and took 4 years to solve. But the mystery surrounding Sylvia and her blood continues to haunt many who closely followed this case. Some find the circumstances so suspicious that they question Bossetti's guilt, arguing that he may have been wrongfully convicted. Conspiracy theories suggest that the DNA evidence could have been manipulated, raising doubts about whether the real killer was ever caught. However, despite these lingering questions, this case remains one of the most high-profile investigations in modern Italian history. Every piece of evidence was thoroughly examined by the country's leading forensic experts, and the likelihood of Bossetti's innocence is considered extremely low. What do you think about this case? Do you believe Bossetti was truly guilty, or do you think there's more to the story? Share your thoughts in the comments. In many toxic relationships, one person mistreats the other. Whether it's a partner, spouse, relative, or even a co-worker. Some people are obviously aggressive, but others hide their true nature so well that no one suspects a thing. On the surface, they appear loving and kind, making it seem like everything is perfect, until something terrible happens. That was exactly the case with Alsu Sabashnikova and Timur Proof. To everyone around them, they seemed like the perfect couple, deeply in love and completely devoted to each other. They had known each other since childhood, growing up in the small town of Messia. And after years of dating, they finally got married. Their wedding was a huge celebration, with guests coming from all over. But just 3 days later, the newlyweds were buried together in the same grave. What went so horribly wrong? Let's take a closer look. Alsu was born on January 4th, 2001, in the village of Melex, located in Tatarstan's Tuvi district. She was the youngest in her family and grew up with an older brother, Rosin, who was always by her side. Their childhood took a turn when their parents divorced while they were still in school. After the separation, they stayed with their mother, Ilira Shira. Not long after, their mother remarried and the family moved to McCoy, a village about 12 miles away from Nabacheli. Alsu and Rushin adjusted quickly and accepted their stepfather, who treated them like his own kids. They even started calling him Dad. Their new home was a quiet, close-knit village with only about 2,000 people, where everyone knew each other. Alsu and her brother fit right in, enrolled in school, and made new friends. The town had a diverse mix of Russian, Tatar, and Yossishis residents, and life there was peaceful, far from the chaos of big cities. Once a week, the local community center hosted dance nights, along with various performing arts classes, including dance and choral singing. During holidays, the town would organize concerts where local talent had the chance to shine. Alsu was an outstanding student, always at the top of her class. Teachers described her as intelligent, responsible, and highly focused. A student they could always count on. She had a calm and level-headed personality, naturally skilled at resolving conflicts without drama. On top of that, she was known for her kindness and beauty, which drew people to her. Many wanted to be her friend, but her closest bond was with her cousin, Sabrina Sashnikova. Despite being 3 years younger, Sabrina and Alsu were inseparable from childhood until tragedy struck. They shared everything, their deepest secrets, their daily thoughts, and they looked so similar that people often mistook them for sisters. Sadly, their lives would both end in a devastating way. From a young age, Alsu faced serious health struggles. A severe viral infection damaged her kidneys, leading to chronic kidney failure that worsened over time. She had to travel regularly to a specialized clinic in Nabacheli for treatment and underwent hemodialysis, a procedure to cleanse her blood since her kidneys could no longer do the job. Her family wasn't wealthy, and the cost of her medical care was a heavy burden. The expenses for treatments, medications, and procedures were overwhelming. During flare-ups, she had to switch to homeschooling, often missing months of school. This made it difficult for her to properly prepare for her final exams and university entrance tests. Still, Alsu had big dreams. She wanted to attend the Nabacheli branch of Kazan Innovative University and study economics. But she knew her health would make it hard to keep up with the demands of college life. On top of that, most of the family's income went toward her treatments, making tuition unaffordable. Her mother tried to comfort her, suggesting that she start with vocational training to learn a practical skill, allowing her to earn an income before pursuing higher education later on. Alsu remained hopeful about her future, determined to build a career she enjoyed and gain independence. She didn't want to be a burden on her family, so she stayed positive and kept searching for the right path. To support herself, she took courses in eyelash extensions and nail care, eventually setting up a small business at home. This allowed her to work while managing her health. While still in school, Alsu met Timur Prokhorov, a senior student who was 4 years older than her. They quickly became close, and over time, their friendship turned into a romantic relationship, which eventually led to marriage. So, who was Timur Prokhorov? Born in 1997 in Nabacheli, Timur was the younger of 2 sons in a well-off family. His parents ran a small but successful business, ensuring a stable and comfortable life for their children, especially when it came to education. His older brother, Arthur, studied law and later took a job at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the late 2000s, the Prokhorov family bought land in the village of McCoy and started building a house. A few years later, they moved in permanently. Both Timur and his brother helped with construction and household tasks, contributing to the family's new home. Those who knew Timur, friends, teachers, and neighbors, described him as a kind and calm person. He wasn't the type to get into fights and preferred to settle disagreements through conversation rather than confrontation. If he made a mistake, he wasn't afraid to admit it and apologize. Academically, he was an average student, but he was passionate about the arts. He participated in dance groups, performed at community events, and even continued performing as an adult. When Otto got married and moved back to Nabarcheli, he had 2 children, and the family remained close. Timur adored his niece and nephew, often spoiling them and spending as much time with them as he could. After finishing school, Timur enlisted in the Navy, serving his mandatory military duty. By then, he and Alsu had been in a relationship, and she eagerly awaited his return. During his service, tragedy struck his family. His mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and despite all efforts to treat her, she passed away within a few months. A year later, Timur's father remarried, and his new wife was warmly accepted by the family. In time, the couple decided to move back to Nabarcheli to focus on their business, leaving their nearly completed house in the village to Timur, who took over the remaining construction work. As mentioned earlier, Timur and Alsu's love story began in high school, and their bond deepened quickly. Alsu had been open about her serious health condition from the start, but Timur never saw it as a reason to walk away. Instead, he reassured her that they would face every challenge together. After returning from military service, Timur continued his studies and later joined his family's business. His income was enough to support both himself and Alsu, but she refused to depend entirely on him. She continued working from home, though her worsening condition forced her to give up nail extensions, as she could no longer handle the chemicals used in the process. Timur was devoted to Alsu, taking her to Nabarcheli and Kazan for medical checkups, treatments, and therapies. He always made sure she was taken care of and looked after her with unwavering dedication. He also formed a close bond with Alsu's mother, who treated him like her own son. By 2018, Alsu's health had taken a drastic turn for the worse. Her kidneys were failing completely, and she could no longer survive without regular dialysis. The only hope was a kidney transplant, and fortunately, her mother was a perfect donor match. However, the surgery and post-operative care were extremely expensive, far beyond what the family could afford. Alsu's condition grew critical. Severe swelling altered her appearance so much that she barely recognized herself. Overwhelmed by distress, she didn't want Timur to see her like that, and even asked him not to visit her in the hospital. But Timur refused to leave her side, standing by her no matter what. As news spread about Alsu's worsening condition and the urgent need for funds, the community came together to help. Concerned neighbors organized a charity concert at the local community center, donating all the proceeds to her family in a desperate attempt to raise enough money for her treatment. That night, Timur also took part in the charity event, performing as part of a dance group. Thanks to the overwhelming support from the community, the necessary funds were raised in a short time, and Alsu's life-saving surgery was paid for. Alsu and her mother traveled to a well-known clinic in Moscow, where a highly respected surgeon agreed to take on the challenging procedure. The operation was a success, and both women recovered well, but Alsu faced a long and difficult healing process. She had to take strict medications, follow a carefully controlled diet, and undergo regular checkups to ensure her new kidney functioned properly. For nearly 6 months, Alsu remained in the hospital, and after being discharged, she stayed home for another year to minimize the risk of infection. Though the recovery was mentally and physically exhausting, she followed every medical instruction. Her mother, stepfather, and brother supported her every step of the way, constantly encouraging her to stay strong. There was also concern about her relationship with Timur. Not many young men would stay committed through such difficult times, and if he had chosen to leave, no one would have judged him. But Timur never wavered. During Alsu's illness, he practically lived at the hospital, staying by her side and later moving in with her parents to help however he could. He drove her to medical appointments, sought out necessary medications, even if it meant traveling to another city, and remained her pillar of strength. Shortly after Alsu was discharged, Timur proposed. She joyfully accepted, and in August 2021, they had their nikah ceremony, a significant Islamic wedding tradition. They then moved into Timur's house, which was still under construction. Alsu continued working from home, while Timur commuted daily to Nabacheli. The couple was saving up for a grand wedding, which they planned for January. On January 4th, 2022, Alsu turned 21, and just a few weeks later, on January 20th, the wedding took place at her parents' home. Family and friends from all over the Republic gathered to celebrate, and the festivities lasted 3 days. Guests described the couple as radiating happiness. Timur expressed his deep respect for Alsu's mother, Elira, calling her mom, which moved her to tears. She thanked both God and fate for blessing her daughter with such a devoted husband. Among the wedding guests was 18-year-old Sabrina, Alsu's bridesmaid, who had traveled from another city. She planned to return home for school on January 24th, but stayed with the newlyweds for a few more days, sleeping in a separate room. Other guests were accommodated in Alsu's parents' house and nearby relatives' homes. On the night of January 23rd, Elira had a disturbing dream. She searched for her daughter, but couldn't find her, while Timur silently placed small coins in her hands. The unsettling vision jolted her awake at 5 a.m., filling her with unease. Though she wanted to call Alsu immediately, she forced herself to wait a little longer. By 7 a.m., the anxiety was unbearable, and she finally picked up the phone. No answer. Neither Alsu, Timur, nor Sabrina responded to her calls. Growing increasingly worried, Elira and her husband decided to go to the couple's house. When they arrived at 7:30 a.m., they noticed that Timur's car was missing. At first, this didn't seem alarming. Perhaps he had stepped out early for something. But when Elira reached for the front door and found it unlocked, panic surged through her. There was no way her daughter, son-in-law, and guest would have left without securing the house. Calling out their names, she stepped inside. Silence. As she moved further in, her worst fears became a horrifying reality. In the living room, she collapsed at the sight before her. Also and Sabrina lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by pools of blood. Their bodies bore multiple stab wounds, and from their cold, stiff state, it was clear they had been dead for hours. Elira's screams tore through the quiet morning as she stumbled outside, telling her husband what she had just seen. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and called the police. Emergency services arrived at the scene at 7:50 a.m. The horrific discovery had already taken its toll on Elira. Overcome with grief, she began experiencing heart problems and required medical attention. She was inconsolable, crying and screaming in disbelief at the loss of her daughter. By this time, relatives of the young couple had gathered at the house, along with curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. Investigators wasted no time examining the scene. Forensic experts found over a dozen stab wounds on Also and Sabrina, inflicted with both a knife and a pair of scissors. However, the murder weapons were missing. The immediate suspect was Timur. He was nowhere to be found, and his phone was unreachable. Yet, his relatives fiercely defended him, insisting he was incapable of such a crime. According to family and friends, Timur was a devoted husband who adored Also, never arguing with her, let alone harming her. But then, some neighbors came forward with a different story. They claimed that behind closed doors, Timur was controlling and possessive. They described him as jealous of Alsu's beauty, often engaging in private arguments that sometimes became loud enough for others to hear. Some even alleged that Also felt guilty about her illness, and that Timur would remind her that no one else would take care of her but him. As investigators dug deeper, troubling details emerged about the night before the tragedy. That Saturday evening, Timur and his friends had gathered at his home, drinking late into the night. When Timur stepped out to see off his guests past midnight, he was gone for nearly an hour and a half, leaving his phone behind. During this time, Also texted her friend Anna, expressing concern. She was worried about her husband and couldn't reach him. Then, at 2 a.m., she sent her final message. Timur had returned. Everything was fine, and they were going to bed. She even thanked Anna for checking in, adding a smiley face at the end. Nothing in her messages suggested any trouble. However, investigators suspected that Timur might have had a jealous outburst upon his return, possibly fueled by alcohol. If a heated argument broke out, it could have escalated into a violent attack. Realizing what he had done, he likely fled the scene in his car. Now, the authorities had to track him down. Later that day, on January 23rd, a breakthrough came. Along a road leading to Yelabuga, in the parking lot of a small roadside cafe, authorities discovered a Lada Priora. Inside the vehicle, they found the body of a young man. Timur had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chin. A rifle was found in his hands, leaving little doubt that he had taken his own life. Authorities quickly identified the deceased. It was 25-year-old Timur Provorov, the man wanted for questioning in the double homicide. Investigators later discovered that the rifle belonged to Timur's father and had been kept in a secured safe in the home he shared with Also. It appeared that Timur had taken the weapon with him when he left that night, possibly already planning to end his life. Security camera footage from a building across the street from the Provorov residence provided further clues. The video captured Timur leaving the house with friends. About an hour and a half later, he returned alone. However, He never appeared on camera after that. Since the camera was only focused on the street, it was possible that Timur left again, driving in the opposite direction out of the frame. A witness recalled that on the night of January 23rd, a local club nearby was hosting a dance event. The newlyweds did not attend, as they had guests over, but at one point, an unfamiliar car briefly stopped outside their house before driving away. The following morning, after news of the tragedy broke, two young men showed up looking for Timur. When they learned what had happened, they quickly left. No one could provide a description of them afterward. As the investigation continued, an unexpected name surfaced: a 47-year-old massage therapist from Naberezhny Chelny. Authorities soon uncovered that she also offered intimate services at her home. Her identity was never disclosed to the media, but it was alleged that Timur had visited her multiple times. On the night of the tragedy, Timur reportedly messaged her, asking if she was available for a session. The late-night request did not surprise her, and she agreed to meet him. Some reports suggested that Timur visited her after murdering Alsu and Sabrina. They allegedly had an intimate encounter, but when the woman asked for payment, Timur refused. An argument ensued, and when she threatened to report him, he lashed out, hitting her multiple times before storming out. The woman later went to the police, reporting Timur for physical assault and alleging that he had also sexually assaulted her. However, for reasons that remain unclear, she later withdrew her statement. Rumors spread that Timur's well-connected relatives, some with ties to law enforcement, had intervened, ensuring her silence. She never spoke publicly about Timur or the alleged abuse again. Some speculated that Timur had actually visited the massage therapist before returning home that night, explaining his long absence. If Alsu found out, jealousy may have sparked a heated argument. It was possible that Sabrina, siding with Alsu, unintentionally escalated the situation, pushing Timur into a violent rage. One final detail stood out to investigators. At 7:03 a.m. on January 23rd, Timur logged into his social media account for the last time. After that, he stopped responding to calls and messages. This timestamp was later estimated to be the moment of his death. Theories of jealousy, infidelity, and sudden rage painted a disturbing picture, one that many found hard to reconcile with the man Timur was believed to be. For those who knew Timur, the idea that he had committed such a brutal crime seemed impossible. Even Alsu's relatives refused to believe the theories of jealousy or rage, insisting that an outsider must have been responsible. Timur had always been described as kind, calm, and level-headed. His actions that night did not align with the person they knew. While he occasionally drank on holidays or days off, no one had ever seen him intoxicated. However, a search of the house uncovered a troubling discovery: a significant quantity of prescription painkillers. These medications had originally been prescribed to Timur's mother, who had battled cancer before passing away. After her death, the powerful drugs had remained in the house, carefully stored in a drawer. Investigators suspected that someone had been secretly using them. This revelation led to another theory. Could Timur have been taking these medications in secret? On that fateful night, had he consumed a large dose, possibly mixing it with alcohol? Such a combination could have caused hallucinations, confusion, or a sudden outburst of aggression. If he had committed the crime in a drug-induced state and later regained his senses, he may have seen no other option but to take his own life. Despite the shocking nature of the case, no criminal charges were filed, as the suspected perpetrator was already deceased. However, the families of the victims struggled to accept Tima's guilt. Alsu's mother, in particular, refused to believe that her son-in-law was responsible. She insisted that he had loved Alsu deeply and would never have harmed her. In accordance with her wishes, the young couple was buried together in the same grave at the local cemetery, her final act of faith in Tima's innocence. The tragic case quickly became the talk of the small village, sending shockwaves across the Republic of Tatarstan. Journalists from all over the region rushed to cover the sensational story. However, while the Provorov and Sabashnikov families avoided speaking to the press, eager villagers, many of whom had never even met the deceased, readily shared rumors and speculation. The case became clouded with misinformation, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. On January 26, Tima's father made a public statement that only deepened the mystery. He claimed that the autopsy had revealed signs of physical abuse on his son's body and that very little blood was found in the car. This led him to believe that Timas may have been beaten and shot elsewhere before his body was placed inside the vehicle. However, just a day later, investigators refuted these claims. They stated that the autopsy found no injuries on Tima's body apart from the gunshot wound. Furthermore, forensic analysis confirmed that the bullet had been fired from under his chin at a precise angle, strongly suggesting suicide. In February 2021, something strange caught the attention of the staff at Sharon Public School in Kenton, Massachusetts. Their 23-year-old colleague, Sandra Birchmore, had been out of touch for a few days. At first, they thought it might be due to a recent snowstorm, but by the fourth day, it was clear something wasn't right. Worried, her co-workers contacted emergency services, unaware that they were about to spark a shocking investigation full of secrets, lies, and hidden truths. Sandra Birchmore was born on May 13, 1997, in the small town of Stone, Massachusetts. Her childhood was tough. Her mom, Denise, struggled with serious health issues, which affected not just her well-being but also the family's finances. Sandra's dad wasn't around and didn't contribute to her upbringing, leaving Denise, her longtime partner, and Sandra's grandmother, Grace, to raise her. Despite their challenges, they tried to give Sandra a stable home. Grace was a big part of Sandra's life, stepping in to care for her whenever Denise was sick or undergoing treatment. Growing up in a home where the adults were constantly dealing with difficulties, Sandra learned how to be independent and responsible at a young age. From early on, Sandra admired people in uniform, whether police officers or military personnel. Her respect for law enforcement grew even stronger because several members of her mom's family had served as police officers or in the military. This background inspired Sandra to dream of being part of something bigger than herself. Her interest in police work started when she was just 8 years old and joined a program called Respect. This program taught kids about responsibility, communication, and respect for others. It was here that Sandra had her first real interactions with police officers, which further fueled her passion for law enforcement. By the time she turned 12, her goal was already clear. Sandra joined the Police Explorers program, which was started in the 1970s to give young people hands-on experience in law enforcement. Guided by experienced officers, participants in the program learned the basics of police work, safety rules, and how to handle emergencies. Sandra was part of the program from 2010 to 2016 and showed impressive dedication. People who knew her remembered how seriously she took her training and how much time she spent sharpening her skills. This wasn't just a hobby. Sandra saw it as a step toward achieving her dream of becoming a police officer. But things took a difficult turn in 2016 when Sandra was 19. She faced a devastating loss. Her mother, Denise, passed away. This was a huge blow, leaving Sandra heartbroken. After her mother's death, Sandra's aunt Denise's sister stepped in to support her. This loss happened around the same time that Sandra finished her time with the Police Explorers program, leaving a lasting impact on her life. Her dream of a law enforcement career began to fade as she struggled to deal with personal challenges. After graduating high school, Sandra began searching for her next steps. She signed up for college prep courses, planning to pursue a nursing degree. Even though her focus shifted, she still had a deep respect for law enforcement and stayed in touch with people she had met during her time in the Explorers program. Despite everything she had been through, Sandra kept pushing forward, but the challenges and losses she faced left her vulnerable. She often sought approval and guidance from people she saw as authority figures, a need that would later play a key role in her tragic story. In 2020, Sandra moved to Kenton, Massachusetts, a quiet town with about 25,000 residents. Known for being safe and family-friendly, Kenton seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. Sandra got a job as a teacher's assistant at Sharon Public School, where she worked with students who had special needs. While it wasn't her dream job, it gave her a steady income and a chance to make a difference. Her experience caring for her mother had given her a strong desire to help others, and she hoped to build on that by taking college prep courses alongside her job. Sandra's co-workers described her as outgoing and friendly, though sometimes a bit immature. She had a habit of oversharing personal details, even with people she didn't know well, which occasionally made others uncomfortable. Still, there was no denying her genuine care for her students and her dedication to doing her job well. Even though Sandra didn't have a lot of experience, her warm personality and openness naturally drew people toward her. But this same trusting nature sometimes led to misunderstandings and made her vulnerable. She viewed her job at Sharon Public School as temporary, a stepping stone on her way to achieving bigger dreams. She had many plans and was preparing for major changes in her life. However, her eagerness to connect with others left her exposed, something that would later play a devastating role in her story. Sandra first met Matthew Farwell in 2010, when she was just 13 years old. At the time, she was part of the Police Explorers program, and Matthew, then 27, was one of the instructors. He quickly became a significant figure in her life. Their communication began within the program, but slowly extended beyond it. By the time Sandra was 15, Matthew had started sending her personal messages. This marked the beginning of a relationship defined by manipulation and psychological control. As someone much older and more experienced, Matthew knew how to use his position to gain influence over Sandra. Over time, their relationship became unhealthy. Matthew grew overly possessive, wanting to know where she was and who she was with at all times. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime content. Thanks for watching.